Fellas, it has been a long time since snipers have been in consideration for the PvE meta inside of Destiny 2. Now granted, I may use one inside of Grandmasters occasionally, but that's really only when snipers are overcharged for that week. But for years now, players have been asking for snipers to just be usable again, like not even meta. And when you think back to the good old days of Icebreaker, Black Hammer, Zen Meteor. Nah, I'm kidding. Zen Meteor was never good, but damn it was it sexy. But back in D1, snipers were disgusting. And then in D2, we had the return of Whisper of the Worm, aka Black Spindle. Unfortunately, the only sniper rifle anyone cares to use right now is Izanagi's Bird. Don't get me wrong, I like Izanagi's too, but people mainly only use it paired with a rocket launcher or a GL. But this year though, Bungie has been slowly but cautiously making changes to bring sniper rifles back into play more. The mid-season update for Season of Defiance brought us a change to rapid fire frame sniper rifles, with the recoil being reduced by 50% and total ammunition increased by 30%. A nice quality of life change for rapid fires, but still not something that moves the needle all that much. It did make Cloud Strike feel better though, which was already a decent option, but again, not really something you're bringing into most in-game activities. Moving over to the launch of Season of the Deep, all sniper rifles received a 10% damage buff inside of PvE, except Izanagi's honed edge shots. Now despite this, no one really cared to pick up a sniper rifle, and we briefly reconsidered it inside of PvE, but I'll admit it still wasn't enough, which brings us to the launch of Season of the Wish. In just a few weeks, guys, sniper rifles are going to receive yet another buff inside of PvE. This time, a 15% damage increase. This is also going to apply to our exotic heavy snipers. Now, there are no exclusions noted here, not even for Izanagi's honed edge shots, which should also benefit from this buff. Now, with these changes out of the way, will this finally be enough to bring sniper rifles back into the meta conversation? We're going to get into some theoretical damage values here shortly, specifically for our top snipers. I feel it is important though to go over the history of sniper rifles inside of our meta over the years and the reason why they have shifted out of the meta. The main reason for this is similar to why Bungie doesn't give scout rifles big damage buffs. These type of weapons are effective at long ranges, and you've probably read previous TWABs and other blog posts from Bungie stating that scout rifles and sniper rifles allow you to do damage relatively safely. Therefore, it could trivialize activities like they have done before. I know I mentioned at the beginning how weapons like Icebreaker and Black Hammer were a lot of fun inside of D1, and they were, but they were also really cheesy, and you could simply sit back as far as you could, and in some case, regenerate unlimited ammo. Icebreaker was used constantly in year 1 of D1, as it was able to regenerate infinite ammo, which did make it very useful for slow, long-range plinking of enemies, as well as aiding us in many cheeses when it came to doing boss damage. Whether it was cheesing Nightfalls, Oracles during Vault of Glass, even the bridge encounter of Crota's Inn, all of this could be done with Icebreaker, and it can be done solo. And the original Black Hammer came with the perk White Now, where rapidly landing 3 precision shots will refill the magazine out of thin air. And we also have Mulligan, so if you happen to miss, you have a chance to return that shot directly to your magazine. Black Hammer quickly became the go-to sniper rifle, as it provided similar benefits as Icebreaker, but it was a legendary instead, and it all around had just better DPS, as if you had like a stationary target or a boss, you could just lay on the trigger for as long as you want. Now this turned out to be a little too spicy, and eventually it was sunset. Yeah, it existed back then. Going into Destiny 1 Year 2 and the Taken King expansion, Black Hammer was out, but in came Black Spindle, an exotic this time around. It was pretty much the same weapon, albeit exotic now, and they had also nerfed White Now, where landing 3 precision shots will simply refill your magazine from reserves. Now it still had Mulligan, but without a doubt this was a nerfed version of Black Hammer. Now it was still an incredibly strong weapon inside of PvE, but that was Destiny 1 though, and now we're playing D2. So the question is, what happened to sniper rifles here? Year 1 of D2 had double primary systems, and snipers were actually moved to the heavy slot. This made the heavy slot pretty bloated, featuring sniper rifles, shotguns, fusion rifles, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and swords. Year 1 was a weird time, fellas. Now I do remember Spire of the Stars raid, where players used Borealis as a DPS strategy for Valkyrie, for those without cluster bomb rocket launchers. Not necessarily the meta option, but an alternative. With the launch of Warmind, the secret mission, the Whisper, was introduced, as well as the reward Whisper of the Worm. Now we have White Now here again, this time stating higher base precision damage, and rapidly landing 3 precision hits will refill the magazine. Now keep in mind, this is how the original White Now perk worked, refilling the magazine out of thin air and not from reserves. It also maintained Mulligan, and this time around, it had an exotic catalyst called Whisper Breathing, where after aiming the weapon without firing for a brief moment, would grant bonus range and precision damage while the weapon remains zoomed in. Very similar to something like box breathing, but it increased the damage substantially. During year 1, this instantly rose to the top of the meta and was used often on Argos during Eater of the Worlds and Insurrection Prime during Scourge of the Pass. But unfortunately, it didn't have much time to shine. With the launch of Season the Drifter, Whisper's reserve ammo was reduced from a max of 20 to a max of only 9 shots. Now on paper, this seemed like a pretty big nerf, but White Nail remained intact so long as you were able to land your shots. Then Season of Opulence came, and this is where it took its biggest nerf. Reserved ammo was boosted up to 18, but White Nail was nerfed to instead pull ammo from reserves instead of infinitely from thin air. Now for those that weren't playing back then and didn't experience it for themselves, you may be thinking, but Cross, that sounds like Black Spindle. And you're right. The difference is that D1 Black Spindle was a special weapon, and inside of D2, Whisper of the Worm is a heavy weapon. Now you also need to consider that at the time, special weapons had now been reintroduced into the game, and other heavy weapons started hitting the scene, such as rocket launchers, grenade launchers, random rolls. We had exotics like Anarchy, Sleeper Simulants, and there was a certain other exotic sniper rifle, but in the special slot that we're gonna get to here shortly. These nerfs essentially killed Whisper though, and although it still saw some use, it was significantly lower than before, and without a doubt, removed from the meta. Since then, we've seen a few snipers come and go. Izanagi's Burden was introduced in Black Armory, which came with the perk Honed Edge. Such an amazing weapon here, guys. Essentially, consuming your magazine will allow you to load a super round with additional range and damage. This weapon is the epitome of high skill, high reward, and it's seen fairly consistent usage since its introduction, especially in terms of hot swapping with auto-loading weapons like grenade launchers or rocket launchers, but you really don't see that many people use it anymore. However, its biggest time to shine was definitely during the year of Shadowkeep, inside of Garden Salvation. Now, you'll still see Iggy swapping pop up from time to time, especially during day 1 raids, where that perfect damage is needed. We also had Cloud Strike, introduced in Beyond Light, which has seen some usage with Stasis Hunters, using Mask of Bacchus, as well as against Taniks in the Deepstone Crypt. And yeah, we'll use them sometimes during raids, but mainly for fun. But I think we can all admit that sniper rifles have been outside of the meta for several years now, which takes us to now. Where are we? With a 50% buff coming next season, will sniper rifles actually be back on the table? We're gonna look at some numbers here. Keep in mind that these are theoretical damage values based on the current damage values versus Carl and next season's buff. To get a more accurate idea of how it looks in a damage phase, we will likely end up doing further damage testing at the Templar. But starting with Borealis, our current crit damage is 38,462. Next season, it'll be 44,231. Cloud Strike, which is 23,810 currently, will be 27,382 next season. Darcy, now again, you want to proc Personal Assistant. This actually cranks up our current damage to 41,541 per crit. Next season, it'll be 47,772. Before you jump up and say, oh my god, Darcy is meta, just hold up. Let me burst that bubble real quick. Izanagi's Burden currently does 36,148 damage per shot. Next season, it'll be 41,570, but Honed Edge will get this buff. Currently, Honed Edge times 4 does 169,834 damage. Next season, though, it'll be doing 195,309 damage. That is a whopper. Then we have Whisper of the Worm. Crit damage is 48,148. Next season, that'll be 55,370. Now, when you proc Whisper Breathing, that increases our crit damage to 71,946. And next season, that'll be 82,738. Now, moving on to some of our legendaries. Kinetic Rapid Fire Frames, which by the way are really good DPS-wise. Crit is 27,381. Next season will be 31,488. Energy Rapid Fires are slightly below that, of course. Then we have Kinetic Adaptive Frames at 36,148. Next season will be 41,570, with Energy Adaptive Frames being slightly less than that as well. Kinetic Aggressive Frames sit at 50,866 damage per crit. Next season, they'll be at 58,496 damage, with our Energy Aggressive Frames being slightly less. Now, I want to just point out before we go any further that Kinetic Rapid Fire Frames, most notably Supremacy, puts out. Now, I know this was a lot of numbers that we just went over, and again, we're going to be double checking this next season. But if you want to know my opinion, snipers, and again, this is my opinion, will unfortunately not become meta in any one area because of this buff. And that's because snipers are so dependent on factors. Things like, is the target stationary? Do they have a large precision area? Things like reticle flinch, ammo reserves. As outside of rapid fire frames, this continues to hold back many snipers. And snipers also continue to have utility competition in in-game activities with weapons such as bows and scout rifles. And when when it comes to just landing precision shots, linears do it without having to deal with all that flinch. Look, I would love for snipers to be meta, but for snipers, it's always going to be situational. And even though this is a nice buff here of 15%, I don't believe it's going to be enough to elevate them into primary DPS position, given that the time it takes to empty the reserves could just be used to fire higher precision DPS options such as linear fusions. Snipers will continue to live in the role of supplemental damage. Now, the burst damage of Izanagi's burden, especially Izanagi's honed edge ×4, provides a transitionary period of damage that other snipers are incapable of obtaining, and essentially used only while waiting for an auto-loading weapon to finish reloading. General DPS uses will primarily be for support players, namely those tasked with providing Gjallarhorn shots, allowing them to increase their damage while waiting for the 10-second Wolfpack timer to expire. The Season 23 15% buff will provide those using snipers for fun a touch more viability. And again, who knows, maybe we get some artifact mods that tie directly into snipers. And the next thing you know, we're all using them. But in my opinion, this is not going to be enough to make the meta. With that being said, here are our top sniper options to go and get if you so wish to use them next season. Number 1 is Izanagi's Burden with the Catalyst. Number 2, Whisper of the Worm with its Catalyst. And again, Whisper still has fantastic sustained DPS and is the king at total damage. Number 3, Succession. It's a kinetic weapon, it's also craftable, and you can get firing line on this sniper, as well as reconstruction. Number 4, Supremacy. Another kinetic weapon, craftable with rewind rounds in the third column, and you can pair it with bait and switch. And funny enough, it has kinetic tremors. Now, we also have a number of other sniper rifles that can roll with things like 4 times the charm or even triple tap with firing line, and that's really just going to be dependent on what the surge is going to be next season. If by some miracle we have Stasis Surge with a host of Stasis reworks next season, then Arakanji could be a good option. As a Stasis sniper, it rolls with 4 times the charm and firing line. You may want to consider it, guys. Granted, it's a raw drop, so good luck getting a god roll. Now, finally, we have Eye of Soul and Izumi. Both return to us next season. Both are adaptive snipers. I actually really like Eye of Soul. Eye of Soul carried me so long before I got Succession inside of PvE, and I'm hoping Izumi has some strong rolls when it returns to us. So guys, that is our breakdown for sniper rifles. If we missed anything, feel free to let us know. Again, I would love it to see sniper rifles at the top of the meta. And I think there are definitely cases where sniper rifles will be good options, but just not the best. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.